Hi, nobody. As I stated in the last video that nobody watched, I will be doing music lessons, apparently, of certain subjects that aren't really usually covered in music lessons and in in metal theory and punk theory. If you look at tutorials and lessons in those styles, they usually avoid getting a bit deep into the theory, so I want to delve deeper. And usually, channels that delve deeper into these subjects aren't generally avoid talking about metal or getting too deep into certain styles of metal and punk. So here goes. First of all, first thing you would need to know, and you should probably know it before coming here, is the minor scale. And if you know the minor scale, you already have a leg up pretty much everybody else that doesn't. And why? Because it has some of the most important things in metal in terms of fifths, minor second with the first chord, and major third with the third interval. If you play black metal, those are the only, practically the only things you will do, and the minor sixth as well, and the fourth. If you play black metal, that's just what you need: minor third, major third, fifth, fourth, minor sixth. Now, usually when we use the minor scale, we don't use the minor scale properly, because the minor scale has a diminished second chord. So if this is our one chord, this would be our two chord. It's diminished. And we will generally avoid fully diminished chords or half diminished chords because they don't work that well all of the time. Generally, we use power chords, and they have a very stable sound. They give that heaviness to the whole thing, and they also give this ambiguity that lets us play outside of the key. And if we start adding tritones, we need to be a bit more careful how we use them if we want to get outside the key. So generally, when we play in the minor scale, instead of playing a diminished chord, we will play a minor chord. So instead of I messed up in the middle, so I repeated it. But yeah, you get the idea. Generally, unless it's like neoclassical metal or something more specifically following traditional harmony, you will avoid doing something like this. Because it's not that useful most of the time. It's very limiting when arranging, because a diminished chord isn't the most, let's say, playable chord, easier to arrange because it's dissonant by definition. That doesn't mean you can't use it, that doesn't mean you shouldn't use it, but generally we avoid diminished chords because we play fifths, and the diminished chord, the tritones ring a little bit too much instead of just this. It's really stable. It gives us that ground to be able to experiment in all sorts of ways. Then another thing you need to take into account are modes. Now, if we use modes, we'll generally use minor modes unless it's specific styles and situations where you will use other things, but generally modes that have a minor one chord. So if we take Phrygian mode, changing keys. Why do we use Phrygian mode? And it's mostly because of this thing. It's if this is my one chord, this is my two chord. It's half step apart, the one from the two, and the one is minor. So we have this thing. 1, 2, 3, a minor flat third. So that's quite useful because a lot of metal is based around the half step movements. For example. And there's also Dorian, which would generally be used more in a folk metal context, I guess, and into jazzier forms of metal as well. It's used. But generally, we prefer to think of minor a lot of the time because Dorian has the major sixth, which is a major sound. So usually when we hear that we think major, but if we take it and we add a minor third, it has sort of a weird sound to it. You need to be able to use it properly to do something with it, because most of the time it will sound a bit weird. If you try to take the techniques you would use when thinking in minor, if you play, for example, black metal, which is one of the things I play the most. If we are thinking about how we play in black metal, we would do, for example, power chord, minor 6, and then we would go to a major flat 3. We'll just go to the third and keep this over here, and we would have a nice melodic black metal riff, something like Immortal would do, for example. And it puts us right into the minor. So if we try to use that in Dorian, we end up with this problem. It's the major sixth. It has a cool sound, but it's a bit weirder. We are not that used to it. So generally it's used in a more folk metal setting because it's common mode in Celtic music. For example, that wasn't necessarily folk metal, but it's in Dorian and it's a bit punkish in a way. So yeah, it's usable. And again, I did the eliminating the tritone thing, where the if we go up a major 6, this one is also diminished. And that sounds pretty strange. It's perfectly usable actually. But usually when we think about playing metal, we don't usually think about doing these sort of things. I will talk about more weirder styles in the future, but for now we leave it just as I did. Another mode you might find with another mode you might find, for example, in Dimmu Borgir a lot. Whole in, puritanical euphoric misanthropy, misanthropia is full of this mode. It's the dominant, the Frisian dominant, which is just Frisian. But instead of being 1, flat 2, flat 3, it goes to a major third. It goes to the natural 3. So we have this cool flamenco sounding, Arabic sounding as well, sound where we can play a major one and a major flat one. So, and as I said, puritanical euphoric misanthropy is full of that. Not necessarily played like this, but you will find a lot of times that they are just playing 1 and a flat 2 and a flat 2. Things like this, and they are harmonizing this flat 2 with a major third, and they are harmonizing the one with a major third as well. Then they use chromaticisms to make it a little more evil sounding, but the bass is just that. It's the main skeleton of the thing. Frisian dominant is quite useful, has a sort of Arabic flavor to it, and flamenco style guitarists use variants of that. There's this whole thing. This sort of thing is amazing to play with. And finally, the other mode that is more or less used, this one's a little bit more rare because it's a major mode, is Lydian. Lydian is a major scale, but instead of a natural fourth, it has a sharp fourth. So and that gives us a tritone. So we have the major 1, and we can add a tritone to that. That is called a Lydian chord. It's a major chord with a sharp 4 in it. It's generally used in a more prog context, not so much in extreme metal or punk, and it has this sort of wonder sensation to it. This movement of just going from the major 1 to the major 2 sounds really nice. Just 2 chords, so it's really easy to play. It doesn't have much of, that much of a mystery, so it's pretty great. I like it, but it's not extremely commonly used because it's, you know, major everywhere. It's major 1 and a major 2. Generally, we avoid this much majorness in metal and punk, in more aggressive styles of music in general. And then switching over from the modes, we have scales, variants of scales that are a bit weirder, and they are not usually what people tell you to use in metal. And those are things like the whole tone scale, I think, whole tone scale. And people usually will not tell you to use that unless you talk to someone who knows what they're talking about. Um, um, the bassist from Cannibal Corpse uses this scale, for example, because it has, well, it doesn't have a minor third, it has no fifth. It has a tritone and a minor sixth. So it has this sort of unresolved sound permanently, despite the fact that it has a major third. You know, it has this vibe. Generally, when people use this scale in other styles of music, it's used in a completely different way. It's used to have a floaty feeling. In this case, we overuse the dissonant intervals. This one goes also in more elaborate, more harmonic elaborate music, but it's useful. It's perfectly useful, and it has this really strange vibe to it. And then what I think is the most useful thing to have when playing really hard and aggressive music is the scale known as the diminished scale. And this scale is just conceptually, it's really easy. It's an eight note scale that is simply whole steps and half steps, one after the other. So the one I use the most would be half step, whole step, and we basically have this movement of just going up a half step and then having minor third, then half step, whole step, minor third. So everything has a minor third. There are no major thirds in this one, and they are all half steps. Your average beat down breakdown would be something like. Moving in that territory, we use that same thing that I said about the minor scale. We put fifths on everything, because this one is a little bit trickier to harmonize. It sounds cool if you actually harmonize it well, but if you are playing riffs, most of the time you will just be playing power chords. This sort of thing. It has a tritone, and it has a minor third and a minor second, so it has pretty much everything you need. So then there's the other variant that is whole step, half step, and this one is also extremely useful. Actually, it's really cool to play it if you keep your hands locked in the same place, because it's really just doing this. If you just go up and down this way, you will have everything, every note in that scale. And it's then it's just jumping around those notes, Just going up and turn down the scale, it's really cool sounding. And there we go, that's just a way to use it. It has the movement that I said in the minor place. This thing all over, just all over. So it's a really fun scale to use. I think the diminished scale, both variants, they are extremely useful, and in the end, it's just taking that and experimenting with it. And if you want to add an extra chord in the middle, so you know, you can just do that. Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But I show this because generally people will be using just pure chromatics, and that gets boring after a while if you don't use it properly and you just end up using a whole, you know, serialistic approach to it, or just don't care about what notes are falling, just put chromaticisms everywhere and don't, and you aren't careful with that, it will end up not sounding that evil, you know. If I just go randomly, in the end it just sounds like I'm playing random notes, and it's kind of a lot of times I feel like it sounds like a fingering practice, you know, like. It just sounds bad. It doesn't sound really useful. You can make it useful, but you need to work with it and know where to put things. And that's kind of it for now. If you have any questions, I will probably see them because nobody really watches this, so I will see every comment. So yeah, I will come back next week, I guess.